The afternoon light was fading when Benedict Cumberbatch finally broke the silence. At 69, his silhouette seemed carved out of dusk itself, half in gold, half in gray, like a man suspended between what he had lived and what he had lost. He sat near a narrow window listening to the ticking of a distant clock, each second echoing a memory he had tried and failed to leave behind. Then, in a voice softened by years but sharpened by truth, he whispered a sentence he had never dared to speak aloud. "There are 5 shadows of my past, and I cannot let go of them. Not anger, not resentment, something quieter, something heavier. The weight of a lifetime carried beneath immaculate suits, red carpet smiles, and the applause of millions who believed they knew him. But fame had only illuminated the contours of his solitude, exposing fractures long hidden behind characters he portrayed so flawlessly. Outside, London continued with its usual indifference. Cars passing, lights blinking awake, people crossing streets without noticing the man who once commanded entire worlds on screen. Inside, however, the air thickened as if preparing to unveil the truth he had kept in the dark for decades. And so the question lingered, unsettling and magnetic. Who were these 5 shadows he could never escape? And perhaps the reason those 5 shadows clung to him so tightly began long before fame ever found his name. For Benedict, the story did not start on a film set, nor under the glare of studio lamps, but in a quiet London home where silence often spoke louder than comfort. Born in 1976 to 2 seasoned actors, he grew up between dressing rooms and theater corridors, watching his parents disappear into roles while he learned, very early, how absence could exist even when someone stood right beside you. He remembered the muted hum of backstage lights, the rustle of costumes, the way he would sit alone with scripts scattered like fallen leaves around him. Childhood taught him discipline, but it also taught him distance. Behind every applause his parents received, he sensed a fragility, an invisible tremor in their lives that he could not name then, but would spend years trying to understand. There was one winter evening, colder than the others, when he overheard an argument through half-closed doors. Voices cracking, promises dissolving. The kind of moment that imprints itself like frost on glass. He did not know it then, but that night became his first shadow. The awareness that love could fracture quietly, without warning, without mercy. From that point, he began to carry silence the way others carried childhood toys. Close, instinctively, protectively. He learned to retreat rather than confront, to observe rather than trust. And every performance he would later give, every mask he wore, every character he embodied, was touched by that early lesson, that the world could be both tender and treacherous, sometimes within the same breath. A lesson that shaped the man and prepared him for the betrayals still to come. But the boy who learned to survive through silence would one day discover that the stage could offer a different kind of refuge. As Benedict grew older, the world of theater, once a landscape of distant echoes, became the place where he finally found a voice. While others sought applause, he sought something quieter, a sense of belonging, a sense of shape in a life that had once felt like shifting mist. His ascent began not with instant recognition, but with years of discipline, rehearsals stretching deep into the night, scripts annotated until the ink bled, the kind of devotion born only from a life accustomed to holding pain close. At drama school, he startled professors with his precision, his uncanny ability to inhabit the emotional fractures of any character. They praised his technique, but few understood its source. Success did not arrive gently. It came in waves, first a role in Hawking, then the theater triumphs, then the worldwide phenomenon of Sherlock, and later the vast cinematic universe that carried his name across continents. With each step upward, the spotlight grew brighter, hotter. Yet beneath the glamour, he often felt the same coldness he had known as a child, the echo of footsteps down a hallway, the memory of a door closing, the tremor of voices fading before their meaning was understood. To the public, he became a symbol of elegance, intelligence, control. But fame, as he would learn, demanded a different kind of performance. It required smiling through exhaustion, hiding fear behind charm, offering vulnerability only in roles written by others. And though the world applauded, the ascent carried its own form of solitude. Friends grew distant, relationships strained under unspoken expectations, and not everyone who walked beside him wished him well. Shadows had a way of keeping pace with rising stars. There was a moment, quiet, almost unnoticeable, when he sensed the first fracture in his circle, a betrayal disguised as friendship, a promise twisted into ambition. Nothing dramatic, nothing shouted, just a subtle shift in the air, a gesture that revealed more than words ever could. It was the first reminder that success did not erase old wounds. Sometimes it stretched them open, and yet he continued upward, step after step, propelled by purpose and haunted by silence. For in every triumph, a small part of him waited, uneasy, listening, for the next crack to appear. Because the higher he climbed, the clearer he felt it. The past was not behind him. It was rising with him. Yet every ascent, no matter how brilliant, carries within it the quiet threat of collapse. For Benedict, the fracture did not arrive like thunder. It came the way winter settles over a city, soft, gradual, unavoidable. One day he noticed that trust, once fragile but present, had begun to thin around him. The people he had leaned on, the voices he believed in, grew distant in ways he could not quite explain. A silence formed between them, sharp and cold. The turning point occurred during a project he had poured his heart into. He had believed in its vision, in the honesty of those who stood beside him. But ambition has a way of bending loyalty, and one decision, made behind closed doors without warning, left him exposed. A colleague he considered a friend had acted in a way that tarnished his name, shifting blame quietly, elegantly, onto his shoulders. In an instant, he understood how swiftly admiration could turn into scrutiny. No confrontation followed, no dramatic outburst, only the slow realization that some bonds break not with noise, but with absence. He withdrew, not out of pride, but out of preservation. He had been raised in shadows. He knew how to find shelter in them again. That moment became another crack in the foundation of his trust. The applause outside grew louder, but in the quiet spaces of his life, he felt something slipping, something essential, something human. And from that fracture, the memories he had buried began to stir. 5 shadows, once dormant, started to gather at the edges of his thoughts. 5 names he had tried, for decades, to forget. 5 shadows. 5 wounds carried through decades of silence. As Benedict exhaled, the room seemed to constrict around him, as if the memories themselves were leaning closer, demanding to be spoken at last. He closed his eyes and the first face appeared, not with anger, but with a softness that made the pain sharper. The first shadow was a woman he once loved quietly, almost timidly, during the early years of his ascent. She had encouraged him, believed in his talent before the world ever would. But affection gave way to impatience, then to manipulation. She began shaping his dreams according to her fears, clipping the wings he had only just learned to use. When she left, she did not wound him with cruelty. She wounded him by teaching him that tenderness could still suffocate. It was a light shadow, gentle but unforgettable. The second shadow was far more abrupt. A fellow actor he had trusted during the turning point of his career, someone who walked beside him on stage sharing applause and ambition. Benedict had confided in him, unaware that every word was being pocketed like currency. One day he discovered that this man had used his vulnerability to secure an opportunity meant for both of them, leaving Benedict behind with a polite apology that concealed a calculated betrayal. This shadow arrived like a door slammed shut, unexpected, echoing, final. But the third shadow, that one, cut deeper. It belonged to someone from his family, someone he loved without condition. A disagreement had spiraled into distance, and words spoken in haste hardened into years of silence. Neither knew how to break. This was not a betrayal of ambition or affection. It was the betrayal of blood, the kind that leaves a permanent ache because the heart continues to love even while it hurts. He carried this shadow not out of anger, but out of regret, an ache for what might have been said, might have been healed, had either of them found the courage sooner. The fourth shadow was different from the rest. It was not a person, but a crowd. The public itself, swift to adore, quicker to judge. There came a moment when a story, distorted and amplified, turned strangers against him without allowing him room to breathe, let alone explain. Headlines sharpened into spears. Whispers became verdicts. He learned then how heavy the weight of fame could become when placed in the wrong hands. This shadow was vast, impersonal, yet devastating. It left him wary of the world he had once chased. And then, the fifth. He paused for a long time, letting the stillness settle. His voice trembled not with weakness, but with acceptance. The last shadow, he whispered, is myself. He had spent years running toward perfection, sculpting himself into someone the world could admire. But in doing so, he had silenced parts of his own heart, moments when he should have spoken up, when he should have stayed, when he should have left. The roles, the discipline, the relentless pursuit of excellence, they had shaped him, but they had also cost him pieces of his humanity along the way. He blamed himself for the fractures he allowed, the silences he kept, the forgiveness he withheld. This shadow was not loud or cruel, it was simply true. And that, he murmured, is the hardest name to live with. The five shadows did not disappear with confession, but for the first time, they no longer loomed unspoken. They stood before him, acknowledged, defined, human. And perhaps that was the beginning of release. And so the room fell silent again, the kind of silence that does not wound but settles. Benedict opened his eyes slowly, as though returning from a long journey through corridors he had avoided for most of his life. The fading light brushed his face in soft gold, revealing not sorrow, but a quiet acceptance, as if naming the shadows had loosened their grip, if only slightly. Before him lay a small leather-bound notebook, its pages worn from years of being opened and closed without a single word written inside. He reached for it now, not to document the past, but to acknowledge its weight. His fingers trembled, not with fear, but with clarity. The shadows would never fully vanish. He knew that, but they no longer needed to define the man he had become. Outside, evening settled over London like a gentle curtain. The city continued unaware, but something within him had shifted. For the first time in decades, he felt the possibility of stillness, the fragile promise that memory and forgiveness could coexist without destroying one another. He looked toward the window, exhaled softly, and let the question arise, not as torment, but as reflection. Can anyone truly live without forgiving? Or must we sometimes keep our wounds close, simply to remember that we once dared to love?